Good evening, friends. We are again with Kritya Talk, a wonderful session with a wonderful poet, a translator, artist, editor, Sudeep Sen, who is a very known name, who is who is internationally very recognized, who has many ways to present her poetry by via his camera, by his translation, by his introduction, by interviews, and many winning books are in his name. He has worked on a very important issue which we are facing still: Anthropocene, climate change, contagion, and consolation. I think that Sudeep Sen, welcome to Kritya. You're known to Kritya. You have come many times to Kritya Festival, and last year also you were with us. So welcome to you.
Thank you.
You are one of the very important voice in English poetry. Moreover, your area of poetry is very vast. Uh, First thing, I congratulate for you congratulate you for this upcoming book, which is coming within 1 week. And I just want to know: is this your uh, project which you are handling right now, or you have handled, or you have written recently? What else you have done in this lockdown period?
So, as I was telling you informally before we went on air, that I've always lived in the perennial space of lockdown. Poets are generally very solitary people. I work primarily for myself in one room. Now, unfortunately, mostly in front of a rectangular screen, which I'm really tired of. It would be lovely to go out and meet some people and have festivals, but sadly, that's the situation of the time. But so the lockdown at some essential level was no different from any other life I've led, because I lead a very solitary life. However, having said that, the lockdown and the pandemic has, of course, thrown up very important issues that I was already dealing with in my poetry and my writing before. But in this particular book that's coming out on May 21st, Anthropocene, and the subtitle is Climate Change, Contagion, and Consolation, published by Paper Run in the UK and Penguin Random House in India. 21st May, it should be coming out in the market. It's a sort of aggregation of the writing I've done in the last 1.5 years during this period. There's been so much tumultuous changes that have happened, not just because of the virus, but also politically around the world, that the world has become more and more divided, more and more people are sort of being drawn apart more and more because of right-wing fascist politics, the deaths surrounding us. It's become too close. For instance, I know 9 people personally who have died in COVID. So it's on our doorstep. So how can you, as a poet, as a sensitive person, not respond to all these things that are coming, that are happening? But climate change is something that has been an ongoing process for a long time. So it's something that I've engaged with deeply. But in this particular book, it's in a much more focused manner. I can't hear you.
Yeah, I remember that your previous books, you have handled climate change very strongly. So that the climate change and all these things, you have bring the contagion also. I think this is for the virus. I assume it is for the virus, and I am sure that you are doing very. Miss, can you give the little more detail of your poems. But
So
what are the
the contagion part, of course, at one level addresses the virus and the pandemic, of course. But there's contagion of a larger kind in humanity.
mm,
The toxicity of people, the rumor mongering, the fake news. That's a contagion. It's a disease. Then there are diseases, modern diseases, which people do not talk about. Mental health issues, for one, which is something that I've dealt with in this particular book. So it's contagion of various kinds, both cerebral, intellectual, and emotion, apart from the obvious virus. And consolation, because I believe in positivity. I always want hope. So the last section of the book is titled "Consolation" because we are looking forward. You see, the thing is, most of the problem is man-made or woman-made. The sun doesn't complain. The sun rises every day and sets every day happily, regardless of whatever you and I want to do. The trees grow. The birds are doing their thing. It's only the humans which have angst and problems. So when you look at a larger idea of the universe and look at the more, um, it's only the humans, the older texts, the Sanskritic texts and the Upanishadic texts, then you realize the wisdom that we have to draw from should make us better people. So I try and look at things as positively as I can because there's always light at the end of the tunnel. And whatever is happening now is happening for a reason and must be for a good reason. So I have faith.
this is what you have said so many things in this these things, because you are not talking about the this virus which is physically attacking on us physically, but the virus which is attacking our mind and emotions, which is changing the society. And not strangely, it is not only in India, in many countries. The many friends from the different part of the world, you may also know them, that
Yeah.
saying the same thing. So that virus, that is more dangerous virus, which is in our emotions, which is biting or which is destroying our emotions, which are destroying our ideology, and which is destroying actually humanity.
Yeah. So which is the reason I feel so good about embracing the lockdown, because I can be completely on my own in a cocoon, in an island, in a bubble, without really have to worry about all this stuff. But let me just read out a poem maybe which will illustrate this. This particular poem, which is in the book, it's called Disembodied. And of course, the locale is Delhi, which is where I live. So it's landscaped in Delhi. But of course, it talks about the larger issue of climate change and so on. Disembodied. My body carved from abandoned bricks of a ruined temple, from minaret shards of an old mosque, from slate remnants of a medieval church apse, from soil tilled by my ancestors. My bones don't fit together correctly as they should. The searing ultraviolet light from aurora borealis patches and etch corrects my orientation. Magnetic pulses prove potent. My flesh, sculpted from fruits of the tropics, blood from coconut water, skin colored by brown bark of Indian teak, my lungs, fueled by Delhi's insidious toxic air, echo asthmatic sounds, a new vinyl dub remix. Our universe, where radiation germinates from human follies, where contamination persists from mistrust, where pleasures of sex are merely a sport, where everything is ambition, everything is desire, everything is nothing, nothing, and everything. White light everywhere, but no one can recognize its hue. No one knows that there is color in it, all possible colors. Body worshipped not for its blessings, but its contours, artificial shape shaped by nautilus, Skin moistened by L'Oreal and not by season's first rains. Skeleton strength not shaped by the earthquakes or slow molded by fearless forest fires. Ice caps are rapidly melting, too fast to arrest glacial slide. In the near future, there will be no water left, or too much water that is undrinkable, excess water that will drown us all. Disembodied floats afloat like Noah's Ark. No GPS, no pole star navigation, no fossil fuel to burn away, just maps with empty grids and names of places that might exist. Already, there is too much traffic on the road. Unpeopled hollow metal shells without brakes swerve about directionless, looking for an elusive compass.
Fantastic,
Thank you.
fantastic. Uh, so I must say that this you are living in that lockdown. You, as you say that that is a emotional, not an emotional one. I'm sure that only the physical one, because you are with the whole world and you are with the whole universe. That's what we should do. That.
Yes,
So
indeed.
yeah. So how do you feel that those lockdown poems should come in the words, because they should take place, they should come on the paper and be as a, do you think that they are history, or they are going to be history, or do you think that they are important uh, for the future of our generation? What is the cause?
Well, I mean, anything we do is going to be eventually, anything good you do, anything important you do will eventually live on. It's called universality. It's called timelessness. So if you're dealing with concepts that are universal and timeless, they will live on. But if you do it, suppose in this case with poetry, and you do it with an honest intention, not just the intention of your heart and your mind, but the intention of language and the use of language. So if you do it well as a well-crafted poem, one hopes it lives on, and it's also a testament of what has happened in the times. So right now we are talking about climate change, but I've written about the riots in Delhi. I've written about death. I've written about nature churning. I've written about so many things. One of my other really deep interest has always been classical music and dance, Indian classical music and dance. So that's an engagement that I have. In fact, my next book is called The Whispering Anklet, Payal. And the entire book is inspired by either dance forms or dancers across the spectrum, whether it's Bharatanatyam or Kuchipudi or Mohiniyattam or Kalaripattu. There are sections on ballet and modern dance. So there are so many sides to one's personality, and whatever you do is, of course, a record. If it's finally published by a publisher and it's printed, and anybody who buys the book, the poems in the book is their property. It's no longer mine because they own it. I've just let it out in the world and it's flown away. After that, it's not my thing. I can't judge it. People can kill it. People can praise it. Nothing is in our control. So, yes, all the things we do, if we do consciously and well, we are witness bearers. We are the mouthpiece of a certain kind of society. And it's important. That is why art is so important, art and literature, because it's, in a sense, the quieter part of diplomacy.
Why I ask you, I think you may understand, because I know you are a very fine poet and you know that how to handle such situations. But I was getting very much annoyed by in the lockdown time. So when there is something happens, the next day you find 1,000 uh, poems popping up in the Facebook, like somebody died and then they will write some poem and with the photo of that those dead body on the train and all, and then it's look vulgar to me, means
Yeah.
I didn't couldn't digest. So I know that you are very fine and you know that how to handle poetry, and that is why I am
Part
a
of the
poet.
part of
Yeah,
the handling is what we talk about in ancient Indian wisdom is detachment.
yeah,
So the
yeah.
moment you detach, then you can see things clearly, both positive and negative. Then they cease to be positive or negative. It's at a philosophical level. So when you detach, then the uglinesses of the world disappear as far as I'm concerned. So I'm really interested in the word. In fact, often I've been given the responsibility often to edit anthologies of Indian poetry, Asian poetry, and so on. And it's a thankless task, of course. You know that because everybody you leave out, they're permanent enemies of yours. Anybody you put in pretend to be fair weather friends. But to me, none of that matters because, for instance, in the HarperCollins Book of English Poetry, some of the people I actually personally dislike because they're just vile people are in the book. Because, however vile they are, a
The
minute
poetry.
5% of them are good poets too. So if the task for me as an editor is to present the best poetry, then the poem should win, not the personality of the the poet. So often people conflate or make a confusion of personality and the craft. I keep things very separate. The detachment is the part of the thing, and I also now tell the publishers I am not going to be reading when I read the poems. I just want to read them blind. You give me a number, each poet is assigned a number, and I read the text. I have no idea whom I'm reading, except, of course, it's a poet I have personally invited who I hugely admire. Of course, I want those poets to be in. Of course, I want Jayant Mahapatra's work to be in because he's a fine poet. Of course, I want Ramanujan's work to be in it. He's known more, of course. But in general, 99% of the submissions that come in, I prefer not to know who I'm reading. Now, it's a thankless job, but it has to be done. The best Asian poetry, for instance, that is going to be coming out later in the year for the Singapore Poetry Festival, Literature Festival. It was a commission from Kitab in Singapore. So I'm really sitting in Delhi, only going to be looking at the text and just choosing it. That's my job. That's what they're paying me for. I do not get into public wranglings about who's better, who's not good. I do not want to make lists. I don't. I just put them alphabetically in order. The best poems, each one is sent if they make the cut. So detachment. That's the
Yeah,
only way.
this is the best word. You use the detachment, and that detachment the young generation should learn because you are one of the senior poet. So, do you think
Oh, but
that?
some of the older poets also need to learn that.
Yeah, I should also learn from you. But
No,
I,
no, no. I'm just saying, in general, it's about human beings. It's not generational so much.
yeah.
It's not about young and old. It's about a
Uh,
character of a human being. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I was just joking. I was just telling that that's what the Ayappa Panikar used to say that what happens that you should not be a reactionary that something happened today you react. That
Yes.
poet should not be you, as you said that you have to first develop the detachment, and detachment develops only when you enter yourself in that situation, and
Yeah.
then you dissolve in it, and then only it comes. So it is a very long process. It is
It is
not
a
a
long process. Absolutely. Absolutely.
uh,
Because
it
if
is
something happens, of course I'm responding to current events or deaths. We all do that. But is the poem worthy of it to be published the next morning with a photograph? Of course not.
yeah.
9 out of 10 times it takes me a lot longer to process the poem, to craft it, to hone it down. In a very rare occasional situation, maybe once in 10 or 15 years, that a poem would come very, very finished when I write it. But that's a rarity. You have to work at it to make it as universal because even if I'm writing about the death of my friend, The poem will only have resonance and meaning if other people can relate to the poem with the concept of dying and the concept of living. The friend who has died is merely the inspiration, and this in this case inspiration is not the right word, but it's only the takeoff point. It prompts you to write a poem on that subject because you know that person, but largely the poem is to do with something else entirely. It's a larger issue. Of course, also you make the poem localized by talking about that person's personality maybe, but again in a way that is disguised. Otherwise, it's going to be just a reportage. You might as well read the newspaper. Why write poetry?
So you please read some poems first, then we will talk.
Okay, so let me read this one. This is called also from the new book, and I'll show you this graphic. Um, this is the front page. This is just a printout. Sorry, Ann. This is the printout of uh, New York Times early days of the pandemic. So what you see is basically the list of names who died in the first flush. That was the front page. Just names, nothing on the first page, just names. Another time they had a front page which was just black. I mean, how can you get? I mean, these are poems on their own. They're so powerful. So I just quote the headline from this particular front page of the New York Times, and it simply said, I quote, the poem is called Obituary, and I quote, they were simply names on a list. They were us. Death knell peals, numbers multiply, virus ravages us one by one. No amount of hygiene ritual enables our lungs to resuscitate. Newspaper columns loom unsteady, ghostly apparitions on broadsheets. Name, date, age, and the time of death. Tall epitaphs in fine print. Ink spills, bleeds dark, newsprint blotting out our wheezing breath. Our lives, micro point size fonts on an ever inflating pandemic list. Black specks, fugitive lonely numbers, the deceased on an official roster. Another sick, another dying, another dead. Yes, they were us.
Very subtle words, but very painful. Very painful. That
Yes.
is that is the beauty of poetry. It's not
Mm.
a it is not a news. It is what do you say that pain and exploration. So, do you think that a young generation is need doing or they need some kind of learning or rereading or understanding? Because I remember that when I was learning to write, because whole life you have to learn. Still, I'm learning. So I was reading even Upanishads also. I was reading, rereading books. I was trying to understand. Do you think such kind of reading is important for young generation?
Reading is important for any generation. You see, whenever I answer any of these questions, I will always say that I do not speak for any one generation or the other. I speak for human beings as we are. So reading is constantly important. Now, the problem with a lot of poets and poetry is they just write, 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 but they don't read their colleagues. And not only not read their colleagues, they don't buy their colleagues' books. So it's but they expect to sell in hundreds and thousands. How do you expect to sell if you're not going to be supporting the whole idea of buying books? So that's one. So these ironies have to be ironed out first at a very personal level. The room I'm sitting in is the sanctum sanctorum of my house. This is the temple, and at some point, if you're ever in Delhi, you'll see it. If you, as an author, Rati, wins the Nobel Prize with your fiction, your book won't be in this room, in this library. But if you are a honest poet and have published from an obscure publishing house, your book will be in this room. So this room has only poetry books. I don't know, there are 10,000 books at least in this room. And it's only poetry, nothing else. So to me, it's a sort of, these are my gods and goddesses. All the poetry books around me, they give me solace, they give me joy, they infuriate me. I can make love to them by just opening the pages and sitting down with a cup of chai. I have complete control over how much I want to read. That's the beauty of poetry, and doing it in a solitary space, and also have the detachment. So you read, you absorb, you write, and then you can create. So, of course, reading is crucial, absolutely crucial. I mean, I would say in my daily life, 2 hours I spend with poetry every day, every day as a puja or a meditation. Since I love many gods and I don't worship any of them, um, my way of worshipping is basically Saraswati, so reading poetry. Of course, I can't write a new poem every day. I would be very happy if I can. But 80% of the time, I'm revising my poems or reading someone else's book of poetry or reviewing a book of poetry. I try and stay in touch with poetry for 2 hours. And again, in our modern lives, it may not be 2 continuous hours. It could be 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour at night. But more or less, I try to be with poetry for 2 hours. And the rest of the time is reading all kinds of things outside of your safe territory too. So read about, so climate change. When you're reading about climate change, it's hard work because it's mostly statistics and spreadsheets and charts. But I learned a lot because you can cull out so much from that. Because when I'm looking at the, say, devastating movements of the forest fires or the waveforms or the climatic cloud formations, I see them as beautiful organic shapes that is making songs and poetry. So you distill that, and then of course you also put the facts in. Just like the poem Obituary I wrote, though its response from a normal reportage, but to me those pages were like epitaphs, these columns of print. To me, they were like gravestones. And then, of course, the other one was just blackness. How much more powerful can that be? So, yeah. So essentially, yes, reading is crucial. It's foundational, and that can't stop.
I
Old and
appreciate.
young. Old and young. So when you say young, they don't read. I don't think many older people also not don't read the younger generation. So it has to be a two-way street. You have to hold hands. Moment you put yourself on the pedestal and look down, there's going to be conflict or problematic tension. But if you hold hands, are willing to hug, and are willing to get hurt, you'll find love. That's the only way. That's the old way.
Yes.
The
So
closest people in our lives have the capacity to hurt us, right? That's because we
yeah,
love them. The rest of them don't matter anyway. So it's only 5 or 6 people who count at the end of the day.
yeah.
Of
Uh,
that, poetry is number one, of course, for me.
Before I ask you to read some poem from your climate change, I want to tell you that I appreciate two things in your poetry. One is your presentation. You
Thank you.
are very good presentative. You present your poetry in such a beautiful form that it opens. Means when you read it, it opens to everyone because this is a beautiful way to present. Second thing, I your language. You work. I do not know, as you say that you work hard for your language, but you have such a beautiful language that they are very simple. Same time, they are very philosophical and very correct. You means very much grammatically and this apt language. So, how did you? I think first you read your poem for the climate change,
So
and then you read.
let me answer this question, because otherwise the question will, for the listener or the reader, it'll be very far away. How do I do this? I don't have an answer to this. I think it's lucky duai, someone is looking after me. I suppose, my 2 hours of poetry prayer, the poetry gods look after me. Just like, you chadao prasad or you go to the mandir, something you must be getting in return. I don't expect anything back, but the fact that you do, for me, it's like riyaz. Because I like classical music and dance so much, I know how hard they work. More friends of mine who are writers are not poets, but fiction writers. And I know they get up in the morning, get onto the computer, work like a full office day, and then switch off in the evening. It's hard work to write a novel. So when I look at them as models, then life becomes very easy. You just have to sit down and burn the midnight oil and work at it, because that's the only way to sharpen your skills. And then once you get used to it, it's like second nature. It's like driving. It's like swimming. You don't have to think about anything. The only thing you can do is to become better at it. The speed increases, you can get fitter, and so on. So since I'm a typical Bengali who never goes to a gym, all my gymming is done in my head. So I exercise a lot with my head. But we have to choose, because in a given day you can't do everything. So I'm content with my flaws and limitations, but within that, I try and do as much as I can. Uh, but language is important because it is the foundation of poetry. If we are sloppy with language and have grammatical errors, my God, person should stop writing. You see, the problem is a lot of bad name to modern poetry has come about purely because people can write a sentence, chop it up into 5 parts, arrange it in a column, and with a computer and a good laser printer and putting a nice font, it suddenly looks legit. But if poetry and fiction have the same rules, you still have to use the same grammatical rules. So people forget. But good writers are good writers, regardless of what genre they're writing in. The building blocks are exactly the same. So yeah, you just have to do it, and you have to be obsessed about it. Leave out whatever is unnecessary. Less is more. That's the mantra. Less is more.
This is the mantra. Yes, less is more. Fantastic. So you please read your poem now.
Let's see. Okay, since we're talking about language, let me read a poem about language. And this is a relatively new poem. And this was prompted actually by my recent, well, it's not quite recent, but the book came out recently. I translated Anamika's selected poems. And the name of the book is My Typewriter is My Piano, but it's a beautiful title. And I was thinking about this whole idea of how we are privileged in India because we are multilingual. In my case, it's Bengali, Hindi, Urdu, and English. So it all came from that, and it's called Language, and it has a epigraph from Italo Calvino, and I quote: "Without translation, I would be limited to the borders of my own country. The translator is my most important ally. My typewriter is multilingual, its keys mysteriously calibrating my bipolar forked tongue. Black, red, silk ribbon spools unwind as the carriage moves from right to left. In cursive hand, I write from left to right. My tongue was born promiscuous, speaking in many languages. My heart spoke another, my head yet another. Translation seamless. Auricles, ventricles pump blood. Corpuscle like alphabets, phrases, syntax cross fertilize my text, breathing life. Texture enriched, music, cadence spatially enhanced, osmotic, polyglottal, a polygamy of grammar. Letter forms dance, ligatures pirouette, ascenders, descenders, pitch perfect. Imagination isn't caged in speech. Speech cannot be caged in language.
Wonderful. Fantastic. Uh, say now, what do you want to speak more about your work or your ideology or your philosophy of the poetry? Do you want to say something more?
No, the thing is, I don't want to really theorize about my poetry. I leave it to others, the grandmasters like you, to do it, because
No, no, I am not the grandmaster,
the
but
readers understand much better than I do. I just simply write and create. Of course, having said that, of course, the craft is something that you constantly learn. Um, I always say to my younger students, younger poets who want any advice, it's when you're starting out, I think it's very important to write in formal verse, because if you want to write free verse, then you need to know what you're breaking. If you want to be an avant-garde writer, you need to be trained classically. So even though their reaction might be that, well, a sonnet is irrelevant in the modern age, or a sestina is irrelevant in the modern age, they are right. But I tell them, try it. You realize how hard it is to write one of those. It's very hard to write a proper ghazal. It's lovely to hear it when it's beautifully formed, but try doing it. So I think it's just a useful idea to write in forms when you're an apprentice, when you're starting out, because then again it becomes second nature, and it's only through that process that you find your voice, and so on. The same goes with art. The same goes with photography. The same goes with music. Once you are trained in the grammar of music, then you can improvise, modify. That's how jazz and rhythm and blues work. That's where even within Indian classical music, an alap can be 10 minutes or it can be 45 minutes. The same rag can be elongated and stretched. It's wonderful how it's done, because it's metrically so perfect that you can multiply the same metric over half an hour or 2 seconds, or you loop back. It's so wonderful. It's the way the cosmos works. It's the larger pattern of the universe. Everything is so symmetrical. It's the golden ratio. It's the balance. Even when you're thinking about physics, you have a pole, and there's a fulcrum and at the two ends. There's always balance, and depending on what mood you want to do, you just shift the fulcrum. But to shift the fulcrum, you have to become very adept at moving the fulcrum. A person who's not very skilled will keep the fulcrum at the end, and it's totally balanced. After a point, if all the poems are exactly that, tonally it'll become very boring. You need to play with the waves and the sine forms. So the sine graph and the cosine graphs in mathematics are simply, these things are all around us. We just need to look. That's why my last big book was called Fractals. What is fractals? Fractals is basically something that is a design pattern in the universe that is both at a micro level, at the level of a proton, electron, and neutron, which spins around the same cosmos. In the largest sense, also in the cosmos, the same pattern happens. So we just have to look all around us. Everything is there, ready made. It's just a question of opening your eyes a bit wider, and listening more carefully. And of course, we as poets are all, are strange beasts. I always have this sort of invisible antenna on top of my head, which keeps picking up sounds and snatches of conversations, which most people don't hear, but I keep it in my notes. They come in very, very handy. Most people think that, they are not, but overheard conversation, what is left and out in a poem, the white spaces in the book, all those things are such dynamic spaces that make a poem much more holistic and wholesome.
thank you very much. But this is I am finding, because you know that Kritya we have many languages and we invite many languages
Yeah.
words. So in recently, for almost for 5 years or 10 years, I am feeling that the English poets are going backward to the Indianness or Indian mythology or Indian philosophy very deeply and very nicely, and very they are doing studying well, but Same time in Hindi, still, if you are writing ghazal, you are not a poet. If you are not writing on the situation or a negative with the negativeness, you are not a poet. If you are writing something very soft or spiritual, you are not a poet. So this problem is there in the languages, Indian language, especially in Hindi, so much.
Mm.
But
No, hmm.
I
No,
am very
I think, go ahead, go ahead. Sorry.
I am very much happy because you know that my subject is ancient literature. You know that
Yeah,
Vedas and all, they were my and I started taking classes, not classes. I talking about it that they are simple poetry, but how they handle, how they treat the words and situation and all,
yeah,
that is important to
yeah.
learn for us.
Yeah.
But
So the trick is very simple, Rati, as we all
uh,
know.
uh,
We need the older text to inform us, to educate us, but the same older text may not be relevant in its presentation of syntax now. So the trick is, how do you make the older text, the foundational text, the civilizational text, anew for a new reader? Not by diluting the content, but by inventing a new way of presentation and craft. That's all it is. So when you say that some of the better Indian poets are going backward, I would amend the word backward. I wouldn't say they're going backward. They are
no, no.
embracing.
Uh,
They are embracing.
I use
Yeah.
wrong word because I am
Yes.
not from English area. It is not backward, but it is
नहीं, वो
in the
पीछे नहीं
past.
जा रहे हैं, वो पीछे नहीं जा रहे, वो embrace कर रहे हैं जो पहले already है.
हाँ,
तो
बिल्कुल. I
that is
agree.
all,
I
that
agree.
is
I
that is
agree.
all that is. वो हिंदी में आप बोलो बैकवर्ड या इंग्लिश में बात तो वही है, पर that all the better writers, the better artists basically embrace the past and have the vision to embrace the future, because that's where history making is. It's the poets and artists who foresee in the future. That's the wonderful gift. Even though I'm a secular person, this person called God with a small g has given us the intimation into immortality, or the that extra beautiful lens, even though it may be cracked, that we can see through it with so many prismed colors. That's the beauty. And if we don't harness those lovely qualities, then, as I said, we might as well write journalism or enter banal politics. The better politics happen not at the level of electioneering. The better politics happen are people who are visionaries, who think about politics as ideas, as philosophy. There's debate, proper debate, reasoned debate, not a shouting match. So, so in any field, it's the embrace of the past and looking forward to the future. The current is a very shifting thing. You see, there's no constancy. We are in constantly in flux, because even though you may be in an illusory state right now, we might be sitting on the chair, but we are not sitting. We are moving at some breathtaking speed because the earth is spinning around. Nobody thinks about it. And it's only our sanity and gravity that anchors us. So we need that sanity and gravity to be highlighted.
So yes, thank you very much, Sudeep. This I understand, but what I wanted to say that uh, uh, when even the ancient texts are also when you are saying the detachment, they only talk about detachment. They also talk about the poetic presentation and and the recreation of those texts, like when we people do in a mythological recreation. That
Yeah,
also be very very modern, very very contemporary. And
yeah,
our seniors have done, like Balamani have done, who was the mother of Kamala Das, in a
yeah,
very very modern way, but we forgot on that. And
yeah,
so that is the problem what we are facing right now. But it is wonderful that when you are taking the Indian smell, Indian idea, Indian philosophy, in an international language which can be read by many international
So,
people.
Rati, the thing is, I don't do it very consciously. I
Uh,
give all the benefit of doubt to my upbringing. I grew up in a very, very educated middle class Bengali family where English, Hindi, Urdu, and Bangla were interchangeably spoken depending on our mood. If you're watching a cricket match, we were probably speaking in English. Poetry was largely conducted in Bangla. My mother knew Urdu. My interest in Cafe Azmi didn't come because suddenly I was asked to do a book or translate it. My interest in Cafe Azmi goes back to my childhood when all the of us were watching cricket and my father was probably having a glass of whiskey and there were all the family members, men mostly shouting away. And my mother just walks in and says, you guys, there's more to life than just that. And she started reciting Aurat. Ut Meri Jaan, that beautiful line. Tere saath chalna hai mujhe. It's feminism to the core. So I get my blood cells are formed from my parents who were very, very anchored and very, very modest as people, but very polite and polished on the outside. When someone would meet my mother, uh, she was very, very traditionally dressed always, but she spoke impeccable English. My mother always was in a sari, and not just any sari. It would be only cotton, and if it's a festive thing, it'll be silk. She never wore anything else except cotton and silk. Um, so these are things that So when people are talking about organic materials and so on, this is all new fashions. I have always grown up in an organic space. We always eat fresh food. So microwave is just yet another computer tool for me to heat the food. But the food still has to be chopped and eaten, unless you're buying of Swiggy or something. So, you have to be very clear about where you stand. So I'm just grateful. So let me, for instance, read this another poem, which is from
Sure.
this book, which is very, very anchored in the kind of space you've done your work in. This was when I was invited by the Banaras Hindu University and some other universities there. So I was in Varanasi, a city I really, really enjoy. And this is an English poem about a very, very, very Indian subject. Burning Hearts, Banaras. Overheated flaming pyres of the burning dead partially shields my sight of river Ganga, its fast muddy currents eddying the floating lamps, bathing bodies, remains of corpses, flesh-bone ash. At Manikarnika Ghat, a mixture of sanctity and stench rises from the silted sands and wooden armatures, fire-aided decomposition of human flesh, the offering swiftly lapped up by roaming animals. An emaciated sadhu with wild knotted dreadlocks perched precariously on a bamboo frame on the edge of the river dreams of alms that might come his way, even at this late hour. Presiding priests feed ritual ghee to the burning wood and dead, its flames forming huge flares, fragmented waves of golden amber spark, electrifying helical fire flurries, a living crematorium drama. A boy scratches his newly shaven head. A pot-bellied man immerses himself in the river. Stray dogs bark, cows groan, loudspeakers bray. Gandhi's posters on Ghatside walls preach peace, non-violence. Amid so much noise, the business of death being transacted carries on without any emotion or fuss. Saffron-robed men on ghat steps sit in yoga postures praying, as does the prayer amid all the din and commerce can get you anyway. Medley of bells, conch, chants, river, water, boat, people, ceases to be a cacophony after a few hours. Variant decibels melding into a drone, a trance, where the only balance that exists is in our minds. Bareheaded, bare-bodied young men, draped in swathes of pure cotton, foreheads smeared in sandalwood and vermilion, carrying ash-filled earthen pots, walk past me towards the river's edge, detached, eldest sons performing the last rites for their dead. White-clad teachers squatting cross-legged on the ghats under large circular cane parasols impart teaching from the Upanishads and Vedas to young priests in the making. Illuminated cane lanterns hang on long bamboo poles curving skywards, homage to the memory of martyrs, guiding light for heavenly asparas descending during the Kartik month to bathe in Kashi. As oil-soaked wicks flickering on beds of rose petal sail, catching the waves' mood. In the superheated pyre, I hear another ritual pot break, another skull crack, another soul take flight. I see some shore temples slow sink into the swallowing river, effects of unpredictable tides and climate change, taking with them both the mortal and the immortal. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, water to heavy water, life to afterlife.
For the ashes to ashes, water to heavy water, life to afterlife.
Thank you.
Very few words you could say many things in these three
हाँ
four
बस वहाँ
lines.
इतने 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 घंटे बैठे थे हर रोज जाते थे सुबह जाते थे शाम को जाते थे बस हम बैठते थे और क्या करना है तो एक तो अटैचमेंट है एक डिटैचमेंट है so these people the priests and the pandas are carrying on business of other people's dying so they are very transactional and transactional people only see the very holy side of it, but there's a corrupt side of it too. But if you take the whole thing together, it forms a beautiful composite picture of reality in a sense. So that's what it is, you know.
I tell you one thing that in Nasadiya Sukta, you may know that in where this is the only sukta where uh, the, the the creation is mentioned, and there they use a word apraketa salila. So apraketa salilam, I was never getting the correct English word, but when today you said that heavy water, water to heavy water, I got that meaning that it could be heavy water here because
Yeah,
they are in the Nasadi Suk they are explaining that there was nasadasi, there was nothing, not a being, not non-being, and not the darkness surrounded by the darkness, but there was a water, and that was also a praketa. It's
yes,
like a heavy water which could not grow anything. So I was
yeah.
not getting this word. So thank you very much. I got this word from you. So thanks a
Yeah,
lot.
it's water to heavy water, life to
Yeah,
afterlife.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Life doesn't end, life
yeah,
continues.
yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah,
we may be dead in our bodies, but
yeah,
the soul takes flight. If you
yeah.
believe in that, I'm not saying I believe or don't believe, but it's a beautiful philosophy that soul takes flight and other things churn and continues. It's a constant churn. We are in a churn. We are always in a churn. The Shaivaic churn. The wig of Shiva, which sprouts the Ganges River, the Ganga River. What is it? It's the Trishul churning. The triad, again the triad, it's always about three: positive, negative, and neutral. Creation, preservation, destruction. It's always the triad, the Trimukhi. What is ultimately the Indian pantheon can be reduced to just two people. Shiva is also Vishnu, is also Brahma, and his consort is Kali and Durga and Parvati. They're just avatars or different moods. That ultimately they're the same people. So that's why there's balance, and nothing changes, but everything changes. That's the beauty.
That is the theory of relativity is here actually in our philosophy. So, Sudeep,
Which is why I think I urge a lot of people to read this wonderful exchange of letters between Rabindranath Tagore and Albert Einstein. One is a physicist and one is a poet. But you should read the exchange of letters they wrote. They're just marvelous. You don't need to understand physics. You don't need to understand poetry. It's all at a level of philosophy accessible to anybody. All these things are just there. People just need to access it. And they're not even that far behind. We're not talking about medieval India or ancient India, medieval world. It's modern world we're talking about. So if you just look around, you're willing to smell both the good and the bad, life can be all right. It's not too bad. There is no that, all this doom and gloom is very temporary. I'm just so grateful that the sun rises every day. Imagine if it decides not to turn up. That'll be gloom. It'll be really
so,
gloomy if the clouds decide not to rain. That'll be a problem. But they don't disappoint you ever. So that's sustenance.
so Sudeep, we are in a very bad situation physically, and you are in the capital, which is in the bad situation. What do you want to say at last? And do you want to read something for that? And do you want to say something?
What do I say? I'm a mere mortal. I'm just a small little spoke in the larger wheel. All I can say is just embrace people. In this case, embrace them with love and help. We can't possibly hug them because of social distancing and all that. We need to also adhere to protocols. People are not wearing masks. They are not interested in following any of the rules. I mean, look at the nonsense. This Kumbh Mela going on right now. There's election campaigning going on right now. And there's the same government which talks about social distancing and COVID relief and vaccination. Does it make sense? Of course it doesn't. So it's out there. You just have to take responsibility for yourself and just be as useful and helpful to your neighbor. That's all we can start. And if every one of us takes care of our neighbor, then as a chain, we'll get herd immunity. It's simple physics and mathematics. Everything works in a chain. All the carbon atoms are linked, in a tetrahedron. You remember those beautiful models of organic chemistry. It's beautiful to look at, but it's mostly C, H, and O with valencies of 2 and 3 and 4. So yes, just be positive, smile, cry internally, but not in front of people. And love, it's a beautiful thing. When I just feel happy just looking at someone else's who's smiling. It just gives me so much strength and joy. That's all we can say. Yeah. But yeah, maybe I should read a poem.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Um,
what I want to say.
so as I was saying, not the book that is coming out, which we were talking about, but the following book, which is The Whispering Anklet, is all about classical Indian music, classical Indian dance. And this is one poem from there called Kathak. And this is dedicated to one of our foremost dancers, contemporary dancers, called Aditi Mangaldas. Kathak. Deep within the eyes of a dancer, irises and poems bloom. On her cupped, curled, coal-lined eyelids, similes smile. On each eyelash, metaphors arch, waiting to flutter. On her bosom's electric silk fabric, secret lyrics are bloused. Her limbs slender extension tips, decant arias, tumries sing, soar, her balletic grace liquid as she dances on water, always afloat. Even Khusro and Kabir, stunned, tongue-tied, searchingly compete to compose couplets for this dancer's next movement. Pupils wide-eyed, she cajoles, seeking her lover. Hidden in the dancer's heart, the beloved quietly resides.
Thank you very much, Sudeep. It was very, very uh, refreshing uh, session today.
Thank
And
you. Thank you to
uh,
you.
uh, no, I thank to you because you came with such a beautiful ideas and you were very, very refreshing from the land which is very dark right now. So I thank you, Sudeep, and
My
I
pleasure entirely.
mm, I thank to our audience also, and I am sure that people will come afterward because they might have not got the. So we have the YouTube channel also, and they can subscribe and they can write whatever they like. So I just asked them to come to YouTube channel because we had many poets around the world. This was the 70th talk. You know that first 10 days poetry festival, then 3 days Central America. So 13 days poetry festival plus 70 talks. So I'm we are very rich with you
Indeed.
people that you people come with so many beautiful ideas. So thank you, Sudeep, and keep in touch
My,
and
my, my pleasure. Stay safe and,
stay safe
and
and
spread love.
lot of love.
Okay.
Thanks.
Namaskar. All the best.
Namaskar.